Welcome to this episode of Let's Be Civil. My guest today on Let's Be Civil is Will Johnson, who I'm sure will appreciate my little display. Will Johnson is currently the U.S. General Manager of Armfield Incorporated, which is a British-owned manufacturer of engineering teaching, research, and small-scale R&D processing equipment. Will has been involved in the marketing and sales of educational equipment and software since 1977. In 2005, Will began exclusive work as Midwest Territory Manager of Armfield, and in 2015 was promoted to General Manager. He now oversees all U.S. operations for Armfield.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Let's Be Civil podcast, and I'm going to start that over. Welcome everybody to today's dry mouth. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Let's Be Civil. Today, I have Will with me, and we're having a little bit of conversation before I got started. And if you peek up into the corner, for me, left side of the image of him in his home office, I see a very disturbing sign on the wall that says Vikings Country. And I just pointed out that behind me, right about there, is a nice helmet of a rival. So debated whether or not we should continue with the phone call, but that's we'll let that one slide and move forward. So, Will, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about yourself, who you're working for, the kind of things that you do, just briefly in your position, and we'll start having a conversation from there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John. So my name is Will Johnson. I work for a company called Armfield Incorporated that's based here in the United States and also has manufacturing in the UK. And we manufacture and provide engineering teaching equipment for the primary disciplines in engineering, at least to us, for civil, mechanical, and chemical, and some others. So usually the equipment goes into the undergraduate labs. And so I'm the U.S. General Manager for the company, and we have just 8 people that work for us here in the States. So it's primarily a sales office. We do have some engineering support here, and then we have the rest of it in the UK office. And I've been doing that since 2005 as an employee, and then since '97, I've been actually selling the equipment.
Wow. So you've been with them for quite a long time.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a little while. So that's 50% of our business. The other half, which I have involvement in, is food science R&D equipment. So we produce miniature pasteurizers and spray dryers and pieces of equipment that are used in R&D labs by companies like Coca-Cola, Kraft, and then smaller operations that might be doing craft beer and something like that. So the 2 prongs of the company are about 50% on a side, depending year to year. And they both tend to be the sale of capital equipment. And I understand that this is an earlier class that you have, John. So capital equipment is going to be large dollar typically. You're not buying a laptop and a desk. You're buying, in the case of the university, your current university is looking into a large research / teaching flume, which is a substantial investment and a substantial footprint in your building, and that's what capital equipment really is.
Yep.
So that's what we're involved with.
Yep. So one little aside, I've been trying to get myself invited to the UK on several occasions, and I haven't been successful yet. So I'm still working on that side of our association with Armfield. Is Someone needs to invite me to the UK to show me around.
Well, you got an open invite there, definitely. And it's not rare that people do come to see the factory and take a look at some of the equipment.
Those
And
kind of things
actually,
fascinate me.
on the industrial and R&D side, what will happen is that equipment tends to be substantially more expensive, and you will actually have clients fly over to test the piece that they purchase, because we're
Right.
just about a one-for-one bill, especially in that side of the business. If you ordered a $300,000 pasteurizer, you might want to have us prove it works before it leaves our factory.
Right, right.
And that's not unusual.
Right, right. So one of the things that's interesting in your field, because it relates to students directly, but it's true in other fields. But we've had conversations with you guys for probably 3 years, when we first began to develop our civil engineering program. And this isn't unique to us because of us having a new program. If we're looking to get some new equipment, there's lead time. There's
Yep.
time that we have to have in advance of anything showing up on our doorstep, so that we are certain we're purchasing the right equipment, that you're actually able to deliver it and install it to, you know, the location that we would like. Many planning conversations that occur before anybody submits, you know, a request to make a purchase. Why don't you talk a little bit about that side of this process, because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind when a student shows up on any campus where your equipment is being utilized. They don't know anything or see really anything about that equipment arriving. It's just there, you know. And
Yeah. Well, I guess that gets into the type of sales environment that we're in. So the broad end of it is, in this case, it's educational equipment sales. So you know, in the education market, it's first of all a different business in respect to the financial year. So most of the schools, both public and private, will have the end of the year is June 30th, and the beginning of the year is July 1. So we have a lot of strenuous activity with people who may have possibly put some things off, who need delivery by June 30th on products that aren't normally delivered inside of 16 to 20 weeks. So that can present a challenge for a business, because obviously you want the business, but can you provide it and meet the terms? So
right.
There is a little bit of planning on our end in that regard, because we know some of our most dominant pieces of equipment in the line. So for example, we might build a few extra hydraulics benches or things that seem a little bit generic to the labs. We'll try to build those in bigger batches, but still our business is not a everyday business in terms of purchases and the same customer contact. In some of the people that in the class today that we're in front of will end up in sales one way or another. They might be sales support engineers, or they might find that they don't want to be behind a desk working on design forever.
Sure.
And they may have a personality that allows them to be a little bit more forward with people and inquisitive, and also have some background that brings them into a field that might get them involved in selling for maybe a construction firm or somebody like that. So anyway, where that goes is knowing what your sales cycle is. So what you really were introducing is, what's the sales cycle? So in our business, we like to call it sort of like pipeline sales. So one of our guys who works in Texas is Joe Insalakos, is a guy from New Jersey. He flies in to cover Texas along with a representative, which we have in some states and not others. And he does that probably about 4 to 6 times a year. He might spend an entire week in Texas. And a lot of that is funding dependent. Texas university system is very well funded, and they tend to put quite a bit of resources into undergraduate instruction, both in the existing programs. So over by Houston there at your Texas A&M main site, you'll still have large investments there, and at Texas State, you're involved in a large investment in the building of a program and updating and doing those kind of things. So those things are very prevalent in Texas. But like John is saying, it takes time. So if I go out with a catalog to see a customer and introduce them to Armfield, I mean, I've met people and had business from them in 24 to 36 months. I met a guy at Washington University that built all of his equipment for chemical engineering since the time I met him in 2002. Let's see, he called me about 2012 and told me he thinks it's my birthday. And I said, really, what's going on? He goes, well, they took my lab from me and I'm not building it again, but we're going into a brand new building. And they literally took the guy's lab. He had a two-bay distillation column, among other things. It was a chemical engineering program. And they ordered about $300,000 worth of equipment for their new lab. So they felt it was worth the scrapping of an established lab, that value in that space, to give them new clean space and new equipment. And that just was a fact. Mm-hmm. And that was a private institution. And again, if you're a student, I mean, private and public money is a different thing, but it can move very similarly on a substantial educational campus, because again, it's budgets and it's time, and that cycle is still fairly long. And that's how that other business ties in too, because if a Kraft Foods or Coca-Cola or any of these big companies that we'll sometimes work with are going to spend $300,000 to $500,000, that doesn't happen in a day. Right. So when you're a student, you hear someone talk about, I'm going into sales, you know, you could sell 5 cars a day if you're out selling on a lot. Right. But you're not going to sell 5 designed and built structures a day. And it takes time for that to happen, or the equipment to go inside that building that's going to be there long term. So long cycle sales is about consistently calling on the people that might eventually purchase the equipment. It's also, for us, it's tied to ABET. So I don't know, John, do you cover ABET greatly?
And as a matter of fact, in our introductory class, that is a topic we cover. So that the students understand what that means. I'll tell you, surprisingly, when I was a student a long time ago, didn't really know what ABET was. The conversations that when they would come up were, there's this accreditation thing coming up, but you know, you guys don't need to worry about it, because it was a bean counting, you know, process back in those days. One of the probably the most reoccurring question I received from students and parents as we were developing the program was, will you be ABET accredited? And it really surprised me that students and family were becoming savvy in respect to accreditation, which, you know, had not been the case when I was a student. I would say probably it wasn't until I was into my master's that it became, you know, more prevalent, the conversations for, you know, I think around the time that there was discussion of how that process was going to change, that, you know, there was much more conversation openly by faculty and such, but, you know, so we are discussing it, and students are far more aware today than they were in the past.
Sure. Well, as a company, we'll pay attention to that. the scheduled reviews, and then we find that some institutions are reactive and some are proactive with when it comes to ABET. And I don't know that one is either right or wrong, because you're either going to get dinged for your lab or you're not, more than likely. And where a company like ours would come into play would be that if we know that a university is going to have an ABET review, it tends to be timed so that 3 or 4 programs will all be under review, because quite often the institution was certified at the same time.
Sure.
So we'll pay attention if there's it's like a school year too. It'll be ABET review 1920, 2021. And we'll just make sure that we do get a catalog to people, or make sure we do hit those campuses during or close to that time frame, so they're aware of us and what we have, and we can be made aware of what their plans might be. Because I'll literally walk into an office and someone will say, hey, you know, we've got ABET review coming up. I'm going to need one of your catalogs, because I know I got a problem here. And they already know. But then what's interesting is sometimes you could follow up, because if you're good in sales, you usually follow up on things. You might follow up 6 months later and the guy go, had a different reviewer this time. So, right. Or they want large scale. No, now they want small scale.
Right.
There's variables there to ABET reviews, but we pay attention to them based on potential for equipment sales, which is what we're supposed to do over here.
Right. Yeah. Now, I would suspect that you don't encounter scenarios such as ours that often with someone starting a brand new program from scratch, or is that not true?
There's a little bit. It can be trendy. I mean, it can be regionally. I can remember in about 2014, it seems like Purdue and Ohio University, the Southern Ohio University, and a couple others were adding programs, and there was like multiple civil programs being added in one region. It's a school outside of KC there, William Jewell. They added civil. That's and what you'll see with a lot of the small privates, they'll have generally two programs, and the trend had been electrical and mechanical. But in the last 10 years, there has to be some need for fulfillment of civil engineers, because up in the Midwest here, we've had more of those places add civil if they didn't have it, or they might actually do electrical and civil instead of electrical and mechanical. So there are trends that obviously you guys would pay attention to as chairs and deans of programs, that you're looking at to see where you need to have students and what the employers are doing regionally and nationally. So we see some of that. I'm not one thing I could mention too is I'm not an engineer, but I'm in sort of an engineering field in a way,
right,
which is unique. And my dad was an aerospace engineer out of Oregon State years ago, and he worked for Honeywell for 38 years. So I learned about being around engineers from when I was a kid. What I learned was, when we're working on the car, if we get stuck, I'll read the instructions, because my dad won't, because he's a mechanical engineer.
Right.
But anyway, he was always fidgeting with different things and inquisitive about different things around the house and working on stuff. And of course, he worked on the hand controls for Apollo missions. So and he was and usually, I don't know if you've had this occurrence in civil engineering, but my dad went to school at Oregon State for mechanical engineering. And then when you went into a field, you could become an aerospace engineer, because there really wasn't aerospace engineering at the time, except for the activity that was taking place. So primarily it was electrical and mechanical engineers in that field. But to end on that, Oregon State was in my territory when I wasn't manager of the company.
Okay.
And when I was out there for the first time, I went down the hallway, and some of the schools, especially old school like that one, has all the graduating classes on the wall.
Yeah, yeah.
And I walked by and I saw my dad's.
Yeah. So what was that like?
That was pretty cool because there was only about 18 people.
Oh, wow.
And so there, I snapped a picture, and I never thought I'd, be doing that, but
Right.
that was pretty neat.
Right.
So, so anyway, not having a engineering background and doing what I do, there are advantages to it. And sometimes the companies set up those advantages on purpose. And this is where you might, down the road as a student, or actually maybe after you get out of school and you start working, you might hear about sales support, and specifically a sales support engineer. And if you thought that making money might be a good idea, then that may be something that would be of potential interest to you if you are able to either, one, show some sales skills, or two, be able to work with a lead salesperson or someone who's out trying to promote whatever business it is that you are in, because it's great if you can design and build things, but somebody has to show interest in them in order to keep people going. So it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, but really, somebody's got to promote what it is that you have. And so there's a lot of ways that can happen, but with engineers that can do that by themselves, like we have a guy who's a chemical engineer who sells the food science equipment. And he also has at least 3 languages. So he's got our Far East market. Of course, he's not going to China real soon, but he has been there a lot, and he's done a lot of business there. So there's a lot of avenues if you have maybe the engineering knowledge, that you actually would have an advantage over me. The places where you'd run into a disadvantage in having engineer in the sales field would be that engineers are inquisitive. Ask one for directions home from the building. Instead of telling you to go down the hall and go into the parking lot and take a right and take a left at the Quick Trip, or what do you got down there, Buc-ee's?
Right. Yeah.
You know what you're going to do? You're going to get directions from the room you're in all the way out the building. And what I'm getting to there is, if you get 2 engineers together and you get them talking, you might, if you're the sales engineer, you might not get to the next conversation that you need to have. And sales tends to be a little bit about numbers and contact.
Yeah.
And so you can, if you have enough knowledge, you could be bogged down on the customer site with a lot of technical questions that really should be answered by your technical staff. Unless it's off the top of your head, real simple.
Right,
Hey, I got that covered in 2 seconds. But ultimately, you want people that are going to put the equipment and the information in front of as many people as possible to increase your opportunity to actually turn that equipment introduction into a sale, which could be a long way down the road.
So let me follow up on that. How do you even become aware that a program is either looking at starting a new degree program? So in our case, we added civil and are looking to adding mechanical now. How do you become aware that there's
Let me write that down for Joe.
Yeah, no, but
looking at mechanical.
Yep, no, and
So,
I mean we're not just looking; we're moving forward. So how do you become aware now? In the case of that, because we're doing something already with you become aware of the next program. But that first program has something. Something has to happen for us to be aware of you to be aware of us, and then the same thing would be updates or renovations that as you were commenting about the lab being redone. What's the process for you to actually know that things are happening out in the field?
Okay, well, there's a couple prongs to it, but and I should answer one of your previous question more fully, but in a short way. I think you had asked. Did you have the previous question down? I'll just answer this one.
Yeah.
We look at one thing, for example, is that college campuses are generally open. unless you're going up into like Flint, Michigan, and you have to literally have security with you the entire way. That becomes a barrier for salespeople. And in our business, what we'll do is we categorize the campuses sort of like major and minor, and then also we have a project going. So if someone has a project going, then you're farther through the pipeline. It's coming out of the pipeline now. Now it's time to get the final quotes, inform the customer that, oh, hey, you know what, we had a design change that might benefit you. You may want to hold off on your order 30 days, or any of these things. They start to become important when the interest and the funds start coming together. Because that's what brings you together ultimately. Now, before that, how do we find you? Well, I know that I just happen to know there's about 520 engineering programs across the U.S. It's sort of my job to know that. And I usually know when one pops up. So every once in a while we'll miss one. People will go to our website and we'll get some bingo cards. We'll call them bingo cards when people go onto your website and they express some interest. It could be a student, could be a professor, could be a department chair, could be anybody. But we know where there's a fairly static number of engineering campuses throughout the United States and throughout the world. So we would go to what we'd call like say call UCLA a major campus. But for us, any major campus is going to be civil, mechanical, chemical, and they might have food science. So all our sales guys, so we have a guy in Colorado, we have a guy in the Midwest, right in the town where I live here in West Bend, Wisconsin. And we have a guy, Joe in Sulaco, who actually calls on Texas and the South. He's going to go twice a year to those campuses. And what we figured is, you know, the campuses are open because so many things happen on college campuses that they're still open. Now, I was previously in a business where I was a rep and I sold AutoCAD and I sold all kinds of equipment that you might put in technical colleges or high schools. Well, after Columbine, you're not just walking, you know, we used to just look for the the back door of the shop and walk in and you could sell the AutoCAD to your shop teacher, because your shop teacher was your tech ed teacher of today and your might be the workforce development person. Well, that's different for those guys that are still in that business, but in the business that we're in with Armfield, we're mostly just calling on campuses, and they're open because people are coming to speak. There's events that happen on campuses, so the security level isn't super high. And what we found is if you're not a jerk, or if you're not a real like a pushy salesperson that thinks they got to sell something every day, we found that if you're politely persistent, hi, I'm Will Johnson with Armfield. I noticed that you teach the thermofluids class for mechanical engineering. Oh, hey, I understand you teach the hydraulics class for civil. Could I give you one of our catalogs? Invariably, that turns into, hey, can you have a seat? I think we're gonna do something. It's not gonna be tomorrow, but can you tell me about? They'll look through the catalog, and so we're still very old school, face to face.
Okay.
And that's how it starts, and it tends to continue. Now we have a young guy. I say young; he's like 33, and he'll call me up and says, "God, I just got kicked out of the school again." I said, "Really?" I said, "What? Wait, I said I wasn't supposed to be there." I said, "Well, that's because you look like a student." So it gets kind of funny because I said, "Geez, I can count on one hand where I've had guys say, oh, you know, you shouldn't, you know,
why are you in the hallway?
Buying Girl Scout cookies here or anything." So I guess what I'm getting to is in sales, sometimes you can feel like a fly because people are trying to shoo you away.
Right.
But if you do what we do and you're a little bit targeted in what you're doing, like if I took the time to go to your website and find out who teaches the thermofluids class, who teaches hydraulics and fluid mechanics classes, if I've taken the time to do that, when I knock on the door and say hello, there's a couple things that can happen. I'm generally doing that twice a year. So quite often it can be the same person unless they're rotating the labs, which sometimes drives us a little crazy because that means someone has to learn the equipment. Depending on the complexity of the equipment, it can be, some people are more needy than others, and it can be a good and bad. So depending on how you handle it. But so that's how we find people. It's really that we know that the schools are there. We have to take the time to know where the programs are. And then we learn through word of mouth that, you know, quite honestly, the way it goes is civil engineering is going to get money. It's not going to be their turn for 8 years, maybe.
Right, right.
But then maybe
right.
mechanical's coming up, and then maybe
Right.
chemical.
Right.
Or maybe enrollment at the campus is just down for some reason.
Right.
You go through the campus, to say, oh, we appreciate you being here, but yeah, we can't see anything in sight.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one thing that I found about the education business is, and one reasons that a person would want to be in it is, the large institutions that we sell in R&D pay their bills. Government pays their bills.
Right. Right.
So we go to the
right.
schools, and you don't have to do these background checks and all these things. You know,
Right,
you can
right.
count on the funds. I mean, if you go to a private school, a lot of times those funds for certain things are government based as well, and there is backing and there is benefactors and everything, and they're well held up. I mean, we've got a project in Colorado going right now where an energy guy bought the land, the building, and they're supposed to give us the POs next week for a civil engineering program. And he didn't want it to go through the school. He built it and he said, I'll give it to you in 5 years. But he didn't want the red tape.
Right.
We wanted to build
right.
a program.
Right.
So
right.
I think it's Rainey or Rady. It's an energy guy. Anyways, big. We looked him up because we were a little concerned about the backup, the financial backup.
Sure.
Because our equipment is built and then it's delivered, and it's people pay for it in 30 days, and you can get in trouble with having to recover that if you don't do it right.
Right.
Especially with private institutions.
Right.
So in this case, I don't know, the guy's worth, I don't know how many, close to $1 billion. I think we're okay.
right.
So we find out about programs. Some people find us, but quite often, you know, a department chair says, hey, you know, we're looking at these things in the future. And by the way, I've got a professor that is coming onto campus. I can't name him or her yet because we haven't signed the contract, but that person is going to be our hydrologist, and I think they'd be pretty interested. Could I keep a catalog for that person?
Good person, right.
And you know, invariably, sometimes there's like I had a guy coming from Notre Dame go to Purdue. He was promised a 10-meter flume there, or 12-meter, and literally, as soon as he hit campus, he called me up. Hey, Will, I'm here.
Right.
And, they tell me I'm getting my funds, and then that's just how it goes. But you get to meet a lot of people. You know, college campus is a fairly relaxed environment.
Yeah.
And the people are working on things that are relatively interesting.
Yeah.
I guess from my view, civil is a little bit easier. Not in terms of the education, but it's easier for a layman to understand that, oh, you want to look at the water go down an open channel and see what happens to the water. Oh, what happens under the water? Those things, where I've commissioned distillation columns, and I'll look at a distillation column. Okay, that's just as interesting as it was when it came out of the box. But sometimes the instructor, the professor, or the student might be looking at it and going, oh, it's going to do this. And I'll be like, oh, wow, you're really, tell me more. And then when the next digit shows up, how excited I'm going to be here. But, and then you find, like, I got to see one of the last helix. I got to see the helix in Madison. I got to see the last guy who was funded for nuclear fusion. Got to see his whole setup before he blew it up again. And I never really thought I would see that. I mean, I was just a business major at a state school that got into this type of business.
Well, you know, and we're kind of running down to the wire here.
Sure.
And it's doing this podcast has been really fascinating for me, because it's amazing how much, as you have these conversations, there's so much more to talk about. There's so many ways to look at, you know, what you do on a daily basis, and just to learn things that even though I've been around and, you know, done this on multiple campuses, you still learn every time you go and you build a new lab, and you're you know, outfitting the equipment and such. It's a new experience because the space is new, you know, for you. You
Right.
know, it's fascinating. But what, you know, you talked about the payment side of things, but and that's understandable. But if you kind of take the financial component out of what you do and your you know, your, I guess if it's 8 including you, but you're a group of 8 in the U.S. What do you think? How do you feel? What's the most rewarding component of what you do? You know, because you're going to put equipment to a space and then you're going to leave. So you're not really. How often do you actually get to see the students utilizing the equipment? So, you know.
That can be actually a fair amount, because a lot of times we go back onto campus to either be part of the installation or the testing, depending on the circumstances. Might not happen if it's 2,000 miles away and it's a single hydraulic suspension, a Bernoulli's experiment that they already know how to run.
Right.
But we see a lot of things. Like we did that big wind wave flume for A&M a little over a year ago, and that's like it's the only flume of its kind. And so we were there for the training for the both the in that case they've got professors, and they have instructional professors, and they have a lab tech, and then we had the random wave company that we partner with for the random wave portion of the flume there on site. And I was there for like 3 days, so you get to see that. And then if I pop into, I'm close to MSOE here, so if I pop in at the right time, I'm there when the students are doing, you know, they're running the flume, or they have a smaller flume there. In that case, you're familiar with Wisconsin, so we get to see people do things like they model things. So the MSOE modeled the dam. What are the kind of the, when you have the water go through the chutes, the tubes, that to talk about how the water comes into the dam, into the reservoir. They modeled it with their flume.
And I'm not a water guy, so.
Oh, okay. So anyway, so we get to see some of those things, and then it's just mostly, you know, the people are pretty interesting that you work with, and you tend to spend more time with them again when it all comes together. Because there's a purpose for that time then.
Right.
Because it's all kind of informational and a little bit, you know, a little bit relationship building, because you know, hey, I got to go see Dr. Johnson. He's pretty cool. He's one day he's going to get funded, but he's a nice guy, and I got to see what he's up to. Maybe he rides a bike, or he's a fisherman, or what have you.
Sure.
He's got something to tell me at the end of the day. And
so being able to walk away from a project knowing that there's going to be a lot of individuals that are going to learn engineering using that equipment.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. You know, when you go and everything is uncrated and functioning, and then you know that the next day it's going to be full, or sometimes when you go there, the lab is full.
Right.
Especially if it's a showcase. Like some places are more of a showcase than others. UIC in Chicago, everything's down in a basement, and it's like the windows are all covered up. And then you go to other places and everything's glass, and there could be a flume, there could be a big distillation column, there could be all kinds of things that are out in the open. And if there's a lab running, they can see it.
Stop and see.
You know, it's talking about instructional lab, because sometimes with research it does have to be, I guess, sort of secure or private.
Right. Especially these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting, and we actually work a fair amount with students as well, because they'll lot of times seniors, if there's no TAs, and sometimes there's seniors that are involved,
helping in the lab.
that are really like, some of the top students are just really at a spot
Sure.
where the professor really leans on them.
Sure.
So we'll have involvement with them, either working with the equipment or sometimes with the data that comes from it.
Yep,
So
yep.
that can be exciting.
Yep. Well, we're going to have to end because that's normal. I enjoy the conversation. We end up going a little bit long, which is fine. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I'd really be interested in having follow-up conversation with you in this venue is about the actually manufacturing of the equipment. So we really kind of spent time today talking about leading up to making a sale and sort of what's involved in that and what is sort of the career like a bit. But when we make the call, and we're particularly at a moment in time where our lab's coming online, we need to now pull the trigger on the sale, the purchase of the flume, which we have been having lots of conversations about making sure that the right equipment in the right space. And you spoke earlier about, making sure that the requirements are being met and such for the equipment. But when we actually place that order, that's going to kick off a process for you guys. And
Right.
I'm going to want to call you back, and probably as ours is going through the process, because the flume, I forget how many weeks the flume has for a lead time.
Flume's like 22 weeks.
So
right in there.
there's a good
Yeah.
amount of time to let some time pass, and then meet up again and have some conversation about where in our case, I mean, our flume will be in the process. And
Well, without giving too much away from in the next podcast, I could say this: that what would probably work would be we could actually get photographs or video of your flume
sure.
being assembled and tested, because it's literally that what's interesting about it is a very interesting question is that 10 meters is not small.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's put together in 2.5 meter sections. It's actually put together, assembled, and tested. Then it's taken apart and it's crated and it's shipped to the United States. So that's not a small undertaking.
Right.
And we could actually get some footage of that.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
Just I could tell you what's going on there, and then we could get some other footage of the flip side is the more simple things that are going on. We've got a vacuum formed hydraulics bench, and then you got fiberglass, and you've got just small or more discrete assembly as well. So we have that we could represent. So let's be more than happy to do it. Yeah,
that would be great. And I think just to see the manufacturing, because we actually have a manufacturing degree program at Texas State, which is not, I wouldn't say that that's a common engineering program on college campuses. Mechanical, yes, and maybe
it's true. I went to Wisconsin Stout, so they have one there, and then also the guy who was sort of the chancellor there, I think, moved over to Bemidji, and Bemidji State has that as well, and it's, they are rare.
Right, right. So even those students could be interested in following this path and seeing what is all involved there. So I look forward to that. That'll be very cool.
We could consider two-pronged, because I could probably get our technical director to possibly have you interview him.
Sure. Yep. That'd be a lot of fun. Maybe we have a group of you guys together. We can have a panel discussion, a virtual panel discussion of some sort. So.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to have to jump off now, but I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
This is very interesting, and as I said, I'm learning things myself in addition to what I hope everybody that finds us, because it'll be fun to see how many people are finding this that are not Texas State students or prospective students. And just to hear from other universities of, like, oh, we were doing that, kind of thing too. So, but yeah, we'll definitely be back in touch with you and have the next version of our, well, maybe the continuing saga, shall we say,
Sure.
of our getting some of this equipment, and maybe a neat sort of bookend part might be when we have our first lab, and
Right.
fire up the equipment for the first time in a lab setting to kind of put the bow on that particular purchase, and kind of at that point in time have a sort of an interesting conversation of really just following the path for that piece of equipment from the concept that we were going to need to get something to actually turning on the flume for the first time, and what all was involved in that process.
Well, we have the last thing I'd say on the specific to the flumes is when we do the installation, the guy that will do the install is he's the world's best. He's the guy he's put flumes in Australia, Germany, United States. He's installed flumes for 30 years.
Wow.
And he knows them inside and out, and can be creative during installation when maybe a forklift goes through an elbow. And you have to have PVC welding done on site in the town you're in, or you're not going to install a flume. So Paul would be one that might be worth an interview at the time when he comes out to the campus.
Excellent.
Be pretty neat.
Yeah.
Because he'd have a lot to say about the flumes and the installations, and his experience is really, I mean, it's pretty incredible, actually.
Right. You'll have to remind me, keep me on my toes on stuff that we could be following.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah.
That'll be really cool to see. So, well, Will, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
spending
John.
with me here in the Let's Be Civil podcast. And I think we have a date for one or two more conversations here in the next several months. So.
Sounds very good.
Yep,
okay, well,
right.
Be well and be safe.
Yep.
Different
too.
times, but very glad to do this today, and it's the right environment for it, so it worked out good, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate your time so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep, take care now.
Yep, bye.
Thank you.